May the 18th, 2024. Guys, this is the article that I promised a few days ago that I was working on, and this is going to be part one of this series. I put together an online PDF, kind of in an article style. When I'm through with it, I'll put a free link to the download, and you can download this information yourself. I've titled it The 13,000 Year Cycle of Destruction. What caused multiple comets to impact the Earth? And that's part of what happened. It's part of a bigger picture, let me say that. And what I'm going to do in this section is to go through some of the headlines, some of the science and data information about events that happened back at this timeline or very close to it. And due to carbon dating, you've got very slight differences, but you can tell all of the events that changed this planet 13,000 years ago is a cycle. And it can go back 26,000 years. You can double that, and we're going to do that. But first, let's just look at some of the information about the events. Now, this is mostly about comets. But, guys, there was so much destruction all around the planet, different civilizations at this time. Some were wiped out. The mastodons were wiped out. The ice cap over the North America was wiped out. Let's just look at some of this again. 13,000 year cycle of destruction. Now, this article was in News. It says, did a comet strike 13,000 years ago change human civilization as we know it? It's from Chelsea Gold on News, published in June 2021. Let me tell you where I've seen this picture before, and this is in the Arizona desert, very close to the Mexican border. Now, this is an image down in Arizona, very close to the Mexican border. When I first saw it, was in a special that Graham Hancock has out now called Ancient Apocalypse. Excellent. It goes around the world and looks at things that happened at this period of time. Highly recommended. It's not biased the way that most Discovery type specials are. But again, you see that black line, guys, that goes right through here? That goes all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, all around the Atlantic Basin. That is, in that black line, they dug it out, tested it. It only comes from comets, the elements that are in that black line. And again, 13,000 years ago, let me pull back up. Did a comet strike 13,000 years ago change human civilization as we know it? Of course it did. It says, could a devastating comet impact an Earth's distant past have forever changed human civilization? Scientists think that a cluster of comets, I have to agree, or comet shards, may have smashed into Earth's surface 13,000 years ago. And the most catastrophic impact since the Chicxulub event killed off Earth's large dinosaurs about 66 million years ago. In a new study, a team led by Martin Sweatman, a scientist at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, investigated the impact and how it could have shaped the origins of the change. Now, these, I'm just got small sections of different articles. Let's move on. Now, I'm going to move through these. This was from an article in Science and Space. A comet may have exploded over Chile 12,000 years ago, and it could happen again. Now, again, carbon dating can be off that much, but these are when the great events happen, guys. And there was a lot of destruction in Chile of ancient sites. Even one called, I think, the landing place, if you understand what I'm talking about. Next, in the Journal of Geology, scientists conclude 13,000 years ago, a 60-mile wide comet plunged Earth into a mini ice age after examining rocks from 170 sites around the globe. That's what you had, the 60-mile impact, but you had multiple comets, again, over Chile, you saw in Arizona, and we've seen impact places around the planet. This also impacted into the Canadian area and wiped out a lot of the North American ice sheet, which was over a mile high in many places, caused massive flooding. It raised, when the North American ice sheet collapsed, it raised the oceans 400 feet. They have not retreated. That's why you've seen these ancient cities and ancient sites underwater. They're still looking for a few. Now, guys, when we look at the charts, we're going to see an ice age started 26,000 years ago. Then 13,000 years ago, we had these impacts and the Earth was in an actual warming cycle. But when this comet hit, it said a firestorm 13,000 years ago covered 10% of Earth's surface. It triggered an ice age, the younger dryas, not the big ice age 26,000 years ago. And when this happened, all the smoke blocked the sun out. Imagine forest fires all around the planet, and that smoke lingers for a long time. Well, as we were rising up into a warming period, this set us back. We hit the younger dryas, wiped out the woolly mammoth, and it changed everything. A lot of all the megafauna, all the ancient stuff, a lot of people, even the Algonquin Indians, talk about this event, these comets striking in the Carolinas and on the East Coast. We have the Carolina Bays that come from that, and we're going to cover it in this series. It says at a point some 12,800 years ago, a tenth of Earth's surface suddenly became covered in roaring fires. That's when the comet hit. Comets, period. The firestorm rivaled the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, and it was likely caused by fragments of a comet that would have measured around 100 kilometers or 62 miles across. Imagine that impact. Earth is starting to warm up. You have fires everywhere. Smoke covers it. Back into a very cold period, like a mini ice age. Now, they found also a massive crater under Greenland's ice points to a climate-altering impact in the time of humans. Listen to this. 31-kilometer wide Hiawatha crater may have formed as recently as 12,800 years ago when a 1.5-kilometer asteroid struck the Earth. It didn't wipe out the ice sheet altogether. Greenland still has it. But if Greenland loses its ice sheet that it has now, we talked about a 400-foot rise that didn't go back down, it would raise it another 23 feet. That's how much ice is there. And I've added in here, it says there was a lot of chaos created in the entire solar system. It wasn't just Earth. That's why I put that there. You're going to find out why. Now, many of you have heard about this, but you're looking at the image on the right, the blue sections is that ice sheet that was over North America that I was talking about. Even into the U.S., guys, it was over a mile high, and it was a sheer wall. There's been interpretations of it, and there's one, a very good one, again, in the Graham Hancock video, the Ancient Apocalypse, where they're actually on the mound, the Serpent Mound, that's up in the northern U.S., and that ice wall came within where you could see it from one ridge to the other at that site. Very good special again. But the Laurentide ice sheet, principal glacial cover of North America during the Pleistocene epoch, about 26 or 2,600,000 years ago up to 11,700 years ago. That's what they're dating it at. And guys, 13,000 years ago, it took an impact. And there was floods up in the northwestern section of the nation near the Canadian border when these ice sheet crumbled, and it was like a dam break, and it was a massive flood unlike anything you've ever seen. It says this ice sheet, at its maximum extent, it spread as far south as latitude 37 north and covered an area of more than 13 million square kilometers or 5 million square miles. In some areas, its thickness reached 2,400 to 3,000 meters. Guys, that's 800 to 10,000 feet or more. You're dealing with almost 2 miles. The Laurentide ice sheet probably originated on the Labrador Ungavie Plateau and on the mountains of the Arctic islands of Canada, and it's centered over Hudson Bay. You can tell by this map. As it spread, the glacial ice mass appears to have combined with other ice caps that had formed on local highlands in eastern Canada and in the northeastern U.S. It was a very cold period. This started 26,000 years ago. Again, we're dealing with a 26,000 year cycle and the half cycle. Again, there's a reason. And just a closer look at that map, guys. Again, you can see where it came down into the U.S. All the Great Lakes were covered. And in this area right here, I think it was up around in Wyoming and all, there's been specials. And Graham Hancock, again, he's not paying me to say this, mentions this in one of his specials. In that special, the Ancient Apocalypse. But when this ice sheet was on these edges, again, it was a sheer wall creeping like you see glaciers going down a huge mountain. But there was an impact that changed everything 13,000 years ago. Now, all of what I'm telling you is not a popular subject with scientists at all, because they don't like going out of the norm. They've tried to debunk it, and it's impossible to do it. Just like they've tried to debunk so many things when they discovered something that they thought we did not need to know. It might scare us too bad. Figure 3 here says diagram of the point inferred from the extension of the major axes of the Carolina-based structures. You've got them there. You've got them up in Nebraska. You've got them in Texas. But they're really centered along the East Coast. And it says the Carolina-based structures and the Nebraska rainwater basins, equivalent to the Carolina Bays in the Nebraska area. There was an impact here of the Great Lakes. It sent shards of ice and probably shards of comet to all these locations. They're using LiDAR radar and pulling it out. Scientists try to debunk it, saying it was washing from the ocean and wave and wind patterns. It was not. It was what knocked out the woolly mammoths. It's what started the decay of the ice sheet. It only lasted just maybe another 1,000 years before it was almost completely retreated, but it shattered it. How did the woolly mammoths die so quickly that they had still fresh flowers in their mouth when they found their frozen bodies? It had to be an instant freeze, right? The flowers still appeared fresh. Some people speculate that as this huge comet and the shards of it came into the upper atmosphere, it created a hole. Cold air followed in it. It was so cold. You're dealing with very cold air in space, around 2 degrees Kelvin or less. When that hole opened in the upper atmosphere, that cold air poured in, and they think that was the sudden freeze that got the mammoths. There's no proof of that, but that's what a lot of scientists are saying. And how else can you have a sudden freeze? They didn't just eat some flowers and then a sudden storm come in, just a storm, and kill them like that. That's why they were called woolly mammoths. It was a sudden freeze. Now, what they're talking about says the point, and they're talking about Saginaw Bay, that impact point. It is evident that finding a crater at this point, taking into account the planetary body that produced it, impacted on a mantle of ice more than 1 kilometer thick, between 1 and 2 kilometers. It is very difficult. First, because the mantle attenuated the impact, and second, because the melting of the ice gave rise to a series of flows that dragged the material, generated and obliterated the crater image extracted from ejected Nebraska, Saginaw Manifold. That's what they call it. Finally, Zamora, and that's the guy in the article, relates the impact that occurred in the Great Lakes area, which led to the formation of the Carolina Bays and the Nebraska rainwater basins, to the impact event of the Younger Dryas, 13,000 years ago. The recent dryas, which occurred now between 12,700 and 11,500 years ago, and again, with carbon dating, that matches exactly this 13,000 half cycle. And we're at the end of one now, guys. Now, let's take a look at some of these impacts. Here, these are aerial images, and forever, these lakes have been there, but no one could really look at the impact and how that one side of the lakes that are left and the holes, the dirt's pushed up to one side, like the impact. Now, they're everywhere. This is a visual image, but in LiDAR, which gives you a totally different view, they use it a lot of times looking for ancient sites, things like that are buried. It's a different view altogether. Let's check that out. And in the center, you can see now that we're some saying there were multiple impacts. The blue lines are the ones that was over the Saginaw Bay, but look at the red lines. And what that did was create impacts below the ice sheets, guys, further south, here in Nebraska, Kansas, New Mexico, Texas, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and I think this is Georgia. Anyway, multiple impacts, a large comet that possibly broke apart, or multiple comets. What was throwing this debris into the inner solar system? We're going to check it out. And guys, let's move over close to the Louisiana side in East Texas. The Carolina bays are being picked up there. This is what can happen when you get comets coming in. You get a disruption from an object further out that's changing everything, throwing comets, asteroids into the asteroid belt, and it's like shooting a pool when you break it. Run that break and things scatter everywhere. That's what we were dealing with then. Now, here's information in the red and blue line I put on top of it, but this is temperatures, and it goes back 140, 150,000 years of temperature changes, and it goes from the right to the left here. Here's where we are at right now at 0. The blue line indicates 13,000 years ago. See this hump right there? We were in a warm-up. Younger dryas happened, comets hit the planet, smoke covered it, cooled it back off, and we dropped back down. And then 26,000 years ago was the beginning right here of this ice age. See that? You can look it up. 26,000 years ago was the beginning. And if you look carefully, if you count in 13,000 and 26,000 increments in here, vast changes. Something I think is very important about this, and what they have done, both from the Arctic and the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, they drill way down, and they can tell by the components and the molecules that survived in that ice, the temperature. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they do it through these cores. They can go back this far in time because that's how old the Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets are, and the Greenland. But right here, it was cold. Over here, this is 10, 20, 30,000 years or so cold. Then it started warming up. Guys, and this is hotter than it is now. And that lasted, we were in that warm-up period of this time here for, let's see, 120 down to 70,000, so 50,000 years. Very hot temperatures. Warm, but very hot right here. Hotter than we are now. Then we saw right here 70,000 years, 75,000 years ago, it start to drop. Again, you can count and get a very close 13,000 year average and 26,000 year average on these events. Then it dropped very cold, colder than we have been allowed to see. Look at this. Especially look at where we are at now. But this lasted from 70,000 years ago, say, 75,000, until 13,000 years ago as it was warming. It had a slight delay for the younger dryas, and then about 11,700 years, like we're talking about, that rise continued. It was just a delay, and now we're back up here. And look at the summers. Look at the events coming. We are at the end of this 13,000 year cycle. About 13,000 years ago, a climate crisis caused a global drop in temperatures in the northern hemisphere. It's not like the man-made so-called climate crisis we see now. It said this episode of intense cold, known as the Younger Dryas, also caused to be severely arid across the Mediterranean basin, which had a major impact on terrestrial and marine ecosystems. It affected the entire planet. A little more information on that. It says the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that the onset of the Younger Dryas' cool period at the end of the last glacial period, remember, we were coming out of that, starting to warm up around 12,900 years ago, fits perfectly in the carbon dating window. 12,900 years ago was the result of some kind of extraterrestrial event with specific details varying between certain publications. Now, in an alternative, now if you'll read this, you'll see some of the different things. Some think it was a continent-wide damage from a 4-kilometer comet. Others think that it was smaller disintegrating comet airbursts, like we saw over Russia again. They speculated the comet airburst over North America created a younger dryas boundary. And again, guys, if they would look and open their eyes, they would see all of this is very closely tied together. They just don't want to admit why. Now, this is an article from the scientists. It's talking about the first Americans. You can see the woolly mammoth there. They're saying it's pretty intriguing to see human footprints side by side with the tracks of now extinct animals such as mammoths. Remember, I told you the Algonquin Indians in the Carolinas and up the East Coast, they witnessed this. They had to hide in caves and get in the mud in the river. And when they came out, they could see the top of the mountains burning, and many of the large animals had died. But they saw this comet coming way before it got there. It was a fire in the sky. And they said when they came out, they could see the main body, or the main comet, had missed Earth, barely, still in the sky, and had done all this damage. And when did they say it happened? Humans are often blamed for hastening mammoth's extinction shortly after arriving on the North American landmass. Had nothing to do with the humans, which, according to what once the prevailing hypothesis, occurred some 13,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge from modern-day Siberia to Alaska. You know why it's not there? At 400 foot of rise when the North American ice sheet was destroyed. But the footprints suggest that two species may have lived side by side for thousands of years. Remember, the Ice Age started 26,000 years ago. Last year, he and his colleagues, and this is Odess, this guy, published radiocarbon dating of the layers of sediment where the human footprints were found that determined their age to be between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. After the Ice Age started, man still survived it. And remember that the ice sheets did not cover everywhere. But that younger dryas changed a lot. The mammoths didn't make it, but some humans did. Now, in part 2 of this, if I don't put it into one video, part 2 will be called what I call the Pioneer problem. What you're looking at, guys, is the emblem that they had on both Pioneer 1 and Pioneer 2 as they launched them into the outer solar system. It wasn't just an in-solar system launch. Let me get this down. This was showing that we were the male and female humans. Here's a star system. Let me pull this down. The sun, Mercury, Venus, the Earth, where the satellite here, Pioneer 1 and 2, were launched into outer space. This is where it gets very interesting. Again, that's going to be in the next section. I may combine them all together, but right now, this is section 1, guys. Stay tuned. It gets a lot better.